To this session today, where we're going to be looking at how to report a health and safety or environmental incident on the IRIS system using the remote reporting form. Let's get started. From the Safety Office webpage, once you navigate to incident reporting and then report an incident. From here, we have a call to action button here to report online now. So I'll click on that. And this takes me into the remote reporting form. To get started, click on the yellow button to report an incident. First section here is about the reporter of the incident. So this is me, the reporter. I need to put my name in and then supply my email address. And you'll notice in this field that there is a question mark icon. And if I hover over that, it provides me more information about completing this field. So these hover hints appear throughout this form. Email address in. This field will send an email confirmation back to whatever email address is entered here to let them know that the form has been submitted successfully onto the system. Moving down, the next section is called Incident Details, and this covers the where, the when, and the what happened in relation to this incident. The first field here asks for a department, faculty, or school where the incident occurred. I click to open up the options. I'm met with a list of all of the departments at the university, and I have a search field at the top here where I can narrow down to the department I want to enter, or alternatively, I can navigate through the pages, the icons at the bottom. For purposes of this demo, I'm going to use a test department. As this field too will send a notification to the departmental safety officer for whatever department is entered here in this field. And as this is a demonstration, I do not want this to go to an actual departmental safety officer. Now with this field, there's a couple of particular scenarios that we should cover. First of all, many departments across the university organise events or trips. This may take the form of social events within a department or fieldwork, as an example, that happens elsewhere. In both those scenarios, we would want the organising department to be entered into this field if there were an incident to take place at one of those activities. Second scenario we want to talk about is where we have buildings that have multiple departments within them. So we refer to this as a joint occupancy building. Now within these buildings, each department will have areas that they look after and manage and are responsible for the health and safety of. It is worth determining beforehand, if you are in one of those buildings, where your boundaries of your responsibility end. So as an example, the Andrew Wiles building, which houses the maths department on the Radcliffe Observatory Quarter, has areas that are managed by facilities management, including the foyer area, the cafeteria area, and a couple of subterranean levels. So if an incident were to take place in any of those areas, we would expect to see facilities management entered as the department. However, if an incident were to have taken place in the teaching spaces or the office spaces where the maths department work from, we would expect the maths department to be entered as the department in that field. Okay, the next field is looking at the building location where the incident occurred. And the hover hint here prompts us to select the closest building if the incident took place outside. If we open up the options, a couple of things to note again. We have the search field at the top to help us select the building more quickly. Also on the right hand side, we have plan on building numbers here. So if you are familiar with your building's plan on number, you can search for that quickly. We also have three options at the top here, which cover non-university premises. So non-university premises overseas, premises elsewhere in the UK, and a specific one for sports venues. For this example, I am going to select Chemistry Research Laboratory. For this example, the next field is looking at the exact location. Again, hover hint here is prompting us to provide as much information as possible. So in this example, I am going to select outside storage. Okay, date and time of the incident are fairly straightforward. For the date of incident, I can either type in the date into this field, or I can open up a calendar view and select the date. And a quick shortcut, if you want to enter today's date, you can click on the word today. So, time of incident, 2 drop-down fields, 1 for hours, 1 for minutes. Fairly straightforward. Then come to the incident description. So this is the what happened. We have a hover hint here prompting us not to include the names of any injured parties involved in the incident. The reason for this is of particular importance to administrators on the system much later on in the life cycle of an incident. So in this example, I'm going to say that there was an explosion in the storeroom. There was a fire alarm activation. Chlorine gas and an unknown biological agent were released. Yeah. One person was potentially exposed. Okay, the next field here is for any immediate action taken to make the area safe. So this is a bit like our emergency response to this incident. So other examples, types of incidents could be, for our most common ones, slips, trips and falls. So if a slip, trip or fall was caused by water on the floor, an immediate action that could be taken to make that area safe would be to mop up the water or put some signage out to say that there is a wet floor. So in this example, we can say that the emergency protocols were followed. This would be things like contacting the fire department, contacting or getting an ambulance to site to deal with the person who was potentially exposed and transport them to hospital, dealing with the release of the chlorine gas and the biological agent, and using any emergency kit that might be involved in that. Okay. Next section is incident classification. And again, as the name suggests, this is about classifying all of the incidents that come into the system, which will help us down the line when it comes to data analysis and identifying trends and running reports. But additionally, these series of 10 questions, when answered yes, some of these will trigger extra sets of questions to be answered, and some of these will trigger notifications to be sent to specific specialist safety officers. So for example, for this question relating to fire, if I were to answer yes, this would trigger a notification to be sent to a departmental fire officer, but also the university fire officer. So we'll work through this section now with this example. So was anyone injured? No, nobody was injured. Was there any form of property damage? So I can make a fair assumption here that because there was an explosion in the storeroom, that there was some degree of damage within that storeroom. So I'm going to say yes. Did a person experience potential exposure to a hazardous material, agent, or environmental condition? Yes, we had one person potentially exposed to chlorine gas and that unknown biological agent. Were any chemicals involved in the incident? Yes, chlorine gas. Was the incident related to asbestos? No. Was the incident related to fire? Again, we've got a hover hint here, prompting that this includes fire alarm activations. So we definitely had a fire alarm activation. But again, I should make a fair assumption that because there was an explosion, there was some degree of fire involved. Did the incident include any environmental impacts? Yes, we had the chlorine gas and the unknown biological agent released into the atmosphere. Was the incident related to radiation? No. Any biological agents involved? Yes, we have an unknown one. Was the incident a near miss? No, it wasn't. Next section is looking at people involved in the incident, and we can add as many people to this form as we are required. So we don't need to complete separate forms to log that multiple people were involved in an incident. We can do it all on one form. If you add someone on, just click this yellow button to create a new person involved. The first question then asks me what their involvement in the incident was. So in this example, we had somebody potentially exposed, so I will select them. We'll see in the remainder of this section that we have questions here asking about personal information of this person, as well as their contact information. However, this next question, person refused to give details. If I were to tick this box, you see all of those fields disappear, and I'm left with a free text box here where I can provide any known details about that individual. So we need to ensure that our system can deal with partial information about people involved in incidents. As anybody who has ever logged an incident using the current paper forms or has reviewed one of those forms that come in, you'll be acutely aware that we rarely get full information about people. It can be often quite not forthcoming for various reasons. So we need to make sure that we have ways of recording that partial information. And this is one of two ways that we can do that. And we'll see the second method in a moment. I'll untick that box for now. Next question asks me about the person involved type. This is looking closely at their employment within the university. So we have things like contractors, employees, members of the public, postdoctoral researchers, various forms of student, visiting staff, and volunteers. In this example, I'm going to indicate that this person was an employee. I'm then asked to provide the department of that person. Now, this may be the same department as where the incident took place, or it could very well be the person from a different department where the incident took place. And if it's the latter, this field will trigger a second notification to the departmental safety officer for the department where the person is from, to let them know that a member of their staff was involved in an incident and they should follow up with them. But again, for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to just select the same test department. Okay, we now come to the questions looking at personal information and contact information. We start filling those through. So I'll say this person was male. You'll now see that there are hover hints on all of the remaining fields. And if I hover over this, this gives us our second method of recording partial information. So for whenever I do not know the specific piece of information being asked, so in this example, the title, I can type unknown, and that would be an acceptable option if we did not know that particular piece of information. This is our second method of recording the partial information. You can either tick person refused to give details, or for a specific field, we can type unknown. I'll just work through these fields now. Mr. Blobby involved. I do not know Mr. Blobby's date of birth or any of his contact information. So for date of birth, I'm provided a generic date that I can enter if I do not know his actual date of birth. And again, I can either type that in or navigate to the calendar to select it. I'll enter that 1st of January 1900, that generic date. And then for the remaining fields here, I do not know any of his contact information. So I will put unknown. Okay. Now come to the specific injury details for Mr. Blobby in this incident. So it asks, firstly, what injuries were sustained. Now, again, if we think of our example, Mr. Blobby was potentially exposed to chlorine gas and the unknown biological agent. So we want to find an option that would cover exposure. And you'll notice this, the options that appeared are in two columns. Column on the left are types of injuries, and the column on the right are body parts. And again, we have a search field at the top to help us narrow down our options. So I will type in exposure. You'll see that the first option we have here is biological or chemical exposure. So I can tick that. Now, if Mr. Blobby had sustained multiple injuries, I can just search again within here. So say, as he was exposed, he fell over and he fractured his left wrist. So I can search for the left wrist. You see I've got fracture here, so I can tick that as well. If I click done, you can see both of those options have been added. So again, we can add as many injuries as are required. Next, we're being asked about the first aid response to Mr. Blobby's injuries. If I open up the options, we have a number here. Firstly, first aid was applied and emergency services called. First aid was applied and they were taken to hospital in an ambulance. First aid was applied and then they returned to work. First aid applied and they were taken to hospital by some other means. So that could be with a colleague, via a taxi, or they could have taken themselves. First aid applied and then went home. First aid declined, or no first aid provided. Again, in this example, we have followed our emergency protocols. As I mentioned before, one of those protocols would have been getting an ambulance to take Mr. Blobby to the hospital for that exposure. So I will select first aid applied and taken to hospital by ambulance. Again, lastly, we're then asked to provide the first aider's name, and we have that hover hint again to type unknown if we're not sure who that was. That's what I will do for this example. Okay, once I'm happy that I've completed all of that information to the best of my knowledge, and click done. Scroll down, you can see that Mr. Blobby has now been added on here. Now, I mentioned already, multiple people involved, we can add them all onto this form, and all I would have to do is follow the exact same process by clicking the yellow button and working through the questions. Okay. Now, in this incident classification field, I mentioned that answering yes to some of these questions would generate additional questions to be answered, and that is what's happened here. You see, we've now got additional sections here for fire incidents, environmental incidents, and exposure incidents, and that's because we answered yes to the respective questions in that incident classification section. So we'll work through these now. So firstly, in the fire incident, was there a fire? So again, I'm working off the assumption that because of the explosion, there was some degree of fire. So I'm going to say yes. The fire service in attendance, yes, they would have come to site. Was there an alarm activation? There was. Environmental incident, what occurred? This was an incident, it was not a near miss. What was the environmental impact? So we had the release of chlorine gas and the unknown biological agent into the atmosphere. This first option here, air emissions or release, would be the best option for us. Then asked to provide details about any materials or agents released. So we can say chlorine gas, unknown bioagent. We'll then ask how much of it was released, and so unknown for the time being. Was any first response equipment used? So again, part of our emergency protocols would have been dealing with the spill, and that would be using emergency spill kit. So we can say yes. Of course, we're then asked to specify what it is. Again, I'm sure it has a fancy name, but I'm just going to refer to it as emergency kit for the time being for this example. Were other neighbouring areas affected? So did the chlorine gas and the biological agent drift to another department or to another building? If I were to answer yes, I would obviously be asked to specify what those buildings or departments were. But for the time being, I'm going to say no. And then for the exposure incident, I'm asked what the type of exposure was. And I can select biological for the unknown biological agent and chemical. There's chlorine gas involved. So you can see I can select all that are applicable for this incident and then click done. And then one last time, I'm asked to specify about what was involved. Chlorine gas. And then okay. Then lastly, I've got a section here where I can add some supporting documentation. So this may be photos of the scene, it may be CCTV footage, or it may be any other document that might help the departmental safety officer when they come to review this incident. If you add on a supporting document, just click the yellow button. Then here in document upload, and then browse to where I have saved the file. I have an incident photo here. And then from type of document, I can specify that it is a photo. And in this note section, I can give some more information about what this is a photo of. So I can say, when I'm happy, I'm click done. You can see that that's been added on. So once I'm happy that I've added all the information to this form to the best of my ability, best of my knowledge, I can click this yellow submit button. It's clicking that button. All of the notifications that I've mentioned throughout the form are now sent out. including the confirmation email back to you as the reporter to let you know that this form has been submitted successfully, which is also specified on the screen that we now land upon. And you can click on the yellow button here to view the incident that you submitted. You can see all of the details there. And if you wanted to, for your own records, you can download a PDF copy of it on the right-hand side here. Yeah, I hope that this has been helpful. Thank you.